All right. Thank you guys for coming. I am a little bit surprised and shocked that there are this many people here, because this talk is really a pretty straightforward talk. This is actually not a typical kind of a mixed talk because it's about deployment. Deployment is not a particularly sexy or interesting topic. If you're just arriving, my name is Scott Hanselman, and you can email me here, and you can PayPal me here, and you can search for that on the internet. And it's a thumb war between Scott Gu and I, so I need you to link the name Scott to me. So if anyone searches for Scott, they find me before they find Scott toilet tissue, and Scott sports, and Scott trade, and Scott photography, and all these other Scotts. We have to crush the other Scotts. So your takeaway is go to your blog and immediately link the word Scott to me as much as you can. So this is about web deployment, and it's not a typical mixed talk because it's really not about JavaScript and design and stuff. It's just about the basics of getting stuff done. But I thought it was a really important talk to do because I've recently learned that we have a lot more tooling inside of Visual Studio, inside of .NET, than I thought. I knew that we had this thing called MS Deploy that came out a while ago, and that this is up on the iis.net website. And but the tooling support and the support for MS Deploy inside of Visual Studio has improved so much in 2010 that you can do some really powerful things. In the past, I've done my deployments on the web with kind of MacGyver type stuff. I mean, I'd be interested to hear if you guys do it similarly, but I've done large-scale deployments with PowerShell. I actually worked at a banking company and have written papers on, like big white papers on managing large banking systems and doing large-scale deployment and management with PowerShell. And we used PowerShell version 1. We copied the stuff over. We used the IIS APIs and the COM APIs and the management APIs to tell IIS to make a new application, set the ACLs, all the kind of stuff that's going beyond XCopy. If you find yourself using arrow snap to deploy your websites, then you're probably doing it wrong. If you are finding yourself using like a deploy.bat that uses XCopy or robocopy, you're probably doing it wrong. If you have to give your IT guys a list of instructions and checkboxes to click with like screenshots of the properties dialog in IIS, I hope you're laughing because you've done that before, then you're probably doing it wrong. I am still learning MS Deploy, but I spent a lot of time with the team that worked on it and the program manager that worked on it. So I'm by no means an expert, but I've already been able to do a lot with it just in the couple of months that I've been working on it. So let me give you some examples. Let's start with some of the stuff that we showed in the keynote. We're going to dig into it. When I say this isn't going to be quite as frantic as the Nerd Dinner talk, if you came to that on Tuesday, or the HaHa show, because I want to get deep. So this is going to be more education and probably less entertainment. So if you get bored, that's okay. Just get bored. As long as you're prepared, as long as you're expecting that you're going to be bored, that'll be cool. All right. So this is Nerd Dinner as it is. This is Nerd Dinner kind of 1.0. This is my little ASP.NET MVC application. The fact that it's MVC doesn't matter. This is about deploying applications. And it isn't even technically about deploying ASP applications, because you can use this technology that I'm going to show you to deploy PHP applications or whatever. So make sure that you understand that even though I'm using ASP.NET, this is really about IIS and about, I would even say, the Microsoft Web Platform, of which ASP.NET is part of that. So in Nerd Dinner, I've got this web config. We've all done this before. And I thought I was being pretty clever. What I ended up doing was I used this thing called config source. I didn't know it existed. Kind of cool. This basically lets you take an element inside of web config and say, our element is in another castle. So here I'm saying production connection strings. So my web config is kind of standardized, but then I've got connection strings, which I check in. This is my local connection strings that talks to SQL Express. You see, it's not even a complete document. It's just a snippet. And then I've got my production connection strings that I don't check into my open source repository. So I keep production connection strings up on the cloud, and then when I deploy, and this is where the trick is here. When I deploy, I remember, and we all know how reliable that is. I remember to go in here and change the string, right? So that's my debug thing. And then my going into production is hitting Control Z a couple times and hoping that that Visual Studio hasn't forgotten my undo buffer. That's my strategy. And I thought that was pretty awesome, actually. And some of you are nodding, so I think you've probably seen similar things. I've also done XSLT transformations, and I've made post-build events. So it would compile, and then I would have some variable set somewhere, and we would then do a post-build event. I've also done it with MS Build, where MS Build would go around and poke at these things and make changes. I've also seen post-build events that would simply say web.something.config, where something is a variable that you pass in to the post-build event, and then it would just copy them over each other. So what we can do now in Visual Studio is way simpler, and I think that some folks actually clapped. And Scott Gu didn't actually expect that. He's like, they clapped for that? Wow, rock on. You can right-click on the web config and say Add Config Transforms. So you can do this now in Visual Studio 2010. That's amazing. Yeah, that's the end of the smattering of applause that we'll be getting at this talk. Now these web configs are kind of diffs. They're not the web config. They're what you want to do to the web config. There's still configuration and system.web and all those kind of things, but we add in a new namespace. This XML document transform. So XDT is that. So here, if I put in that connection strings there, XDT locator says I'm going to go match on name. I'm going to look at web config, and I'm going to look for anything with the name mydb. And then I'm going to go and change its attributes. I'm going to find that element, and I'm going to change its attributes and replace them with this one. Okay? Now, when I saw XML document transform, I immediately said, wow, XSLT is too good for you. Like, we're going to go and are we really doing this? We're going to make another whole thing, another whole transformation engine. And I was on the phone with one of the designers yesterday, and I made that kind of pointed statement. Really? It was kind of like Saturday night. Really? Is that how we're going to play this? So he said this, and it was kind of a ninja move, I thought. He said, well, here's how you do it in XSLT. The student has become the teacher. So I was like, okay, well, wait a second. So that's how you do it in XSLT. Well, how do you do it in MS Deploy? Right? So this isn't, and this is really important, right? Because I'm going to be making a bunch of kind of framing statements, because I want you guys to come away with knowledge of this tool and an understanding that this is actually easier than you think, it's more powerful than you think. Yes, it's kind of confusing and there's some documentation problems, but this is like one of the great secrets of Visual Studio. Just like I came here last year and told you guys about T4, the code generation engine that's inside of Visual Studio, which is like one of our great secrets. It's the kind of thing that, doesn't really demo well from a keynote perspective, but you should just like be singing to the hills that it's amazing and wonderful. This is one of those things too. There's some syntax things, but for the most part, this isn't about XSLT. We didn't invent a whole document transformation language. We invented a transformation language that is specific for making configuration changes like this. Really, really intuitive and easy. If you have an existing setting, you just put it like that, and you say, I'm going to insert that node. That's the goal. That's the goal. And that's why not XSLT. So I was like, nicely done, sir. Well played. So what I did was I took Nerd Dinner and then made it from lame deployment to better deployment. So I'll fire that up, and I'll show you what I ended up having to do. Because Nerd Dinner's got more than just a couple of connection strings. It's a little bit more complicated. Still not the world's most complicated application. So my web config for Nerd Dinner is a little more sophisticated than typical web configs because I've got connection strings. Don't worry about not having to read this. This is a philosophical thing. Membership and things like that. Namespace I wanted to add to pages. You know, there's legitimate stuff in here. I've got a couple of things going on. We've got like custom errors. So Nerd Dinner is smart about errors. And if you are looking for something and you get a 404, then I'll say having trouble, dinners/trouble. You know, or if you like start really screwing around, you know, I'll be like, are you confused? And I send them to dinners/confused. But those are things that I don't want to show at development time. So here's where I got a little confused, and then I started getting a sense of how this works and when this happens. These are build configurations, but the actual transformation occurs at publish time. So this isn't that I change web.debug.config and I hit F5. And it happens. It's at the time when I deploy that. So the web config here is my local box web config. It's the web config in the state where I'm going to do my development. My initial idea was that I would have a really empty web config, and then I would do all of the adding of connection strings later. But web config by itself has what I need to develop. I've added debug and release, but I could add other ones. I could say staging, I could say whatever I wanted to. As long as they line up in this configuration manager, like we did in the keynote where we had staging. So you can have, you know, dev, test, staging, production, whatever you want. You can have multiple machines in a web farm. It's totally up to you. So on my debug version, I use a transform that says replace. This XDT transform string is part of a plugin model. And this is the part where I was like, okay. They wrote this whole thing using their own plugin. So they have a plugin model, and then they wrote a bunch of transforms. So there's like 12 or 13 transforms that you can use, meaning the 12 or 13 strings you can go to insert, replace, insert before, insert after, things like that. Plus, I could make like, you know, the Scott transform if I wanted to. And then I'd have a DLL, I'd put it in an extensions folder, and then now that would happen. In this case, I'm just finding custom errors and saying replace. It's figuring out where that section is because I'm giving it kind of the web template. Now, if I'm not comfortable with that, if I don't like the way that looks, you could still go and use something like this. So rather than saying system.web, configuration, add, right, having that example where I'm teaching the system how to find something, if you really insist and you're a big XML person, you could totally do that. Right? You could say locate. And in this case, it gets a little more sophisticated and you can do things that aren't typically possible. I can say, well, just go get connection strings that have this name or that provider and then replace it with this one. You can see how that kind of logic could be a little more complicated in XSLT. So what he's trying to do is he's trying to walk a line between, you know, the things that are good and easy and convenient and specific about XSLT and avoiding the things that aren't, remembering that the goal here is not a generic engine for transforming XML, but a thing for making deployment easier. So XPath is a little function there. We can also do this. You know, if you really insist, totally okay to do that and point to an XSLT, which I thought was a nice touch. You know, it's like, okay, you know, if there's really, really, really something you can't do. And this is one of the things that you'll find about MS Deploy, is that the easy stuff is really easy, and if you really want it to get out of the way, then you can, you know, be hardcore, and that's cool too. So what I did for debug was this replace, but release is a lot more complicated. With release, I needed to change a number of things. I needed to go and use a match to find the names that matched of connection strings, because I have to say that my application services, like login, and my entities are in different places. So they're up at OrcsWeb, who does my hosting. Then I had to add some keys for some of the things, like I was doing Twitter and OAuth and OpenID. So those secrets I don't want in my debug one. I don't want it as an open source project. I don't want to check that in. So this whole section, this whole, you know, web.release.config is my own thing, and it's staying locally. And then The really convenient thing, of course, is turning on custom errors. I need to be able to turn on custom errors because I want them off when I'm debugging and I want them on when I release, but I don't want to have to think about it. So here we're already seeing transform replace, transform set attributes, and then we've also got transform remove attributes. This is kind of cool. Compilation transform remove attributes is going to go and find this. It's going to yank that away. So what I can do to give some examples is I'm going to say publish. I can do a number of different publish profiles. There's two ways that this is done, and I'll talk about packaging in a minute, but there's basically offline and online. There's publishing when you have access to the server, and there's publishing when you don't have access to the server. Because in large enterprises, they'll never let you deploy from like your desk or even from a build server. Some dude with a floppy is going to walk across the room, right? We actually did some work for the Fed once. We were doing some really sophisticated WS security stuff, and it was just this amazing kind of Rube Goldbergian, you know, the marble goes down and it hits the iron and the iron falls, and then the guy, and it was all just like XAML tokens and magic. And then one day it stopped working. And it turned out that Fred hadn't come in that day. And Fred's job was to take the zip disk from that computer to the secure computer. You know, he like swivels on his, and that was like the sneaker net. And when he doesn't show up, all of your workflow somehow looks less impressive. But you want a deployment system that'll work like that. So we'll talk about that in a moment. There's a number of different publish methods. I'm just going to go file system for now. And I will say C:, deployment tests, and let's nerd dinner prod. Nerd dinner prod. All right. And I have choices, of course, like, you know, replace all the files and stuff like that. And then everything will show up in my nerd prod folder. And then what I wanted to do is I just want to grab that web config, just for purposes of the demo. Bring that over here. And then I'll do a little split screen action. And we'll see, see this here? Debug true. Because I set that to debug. Let's set that to release. Now it's gone. So you get the kind of idea. Oh, we clap for that. Guy just did an XSLT transformation effectively on stage, and we clapped because the editor noticed it. Welcome to Emacs, circa 1984. Thank you, though, for that tiny little thing there. We'll be going to Chipotle later. So this is my local. That's a local build. Now, and that's kind of a cheesy example in the sense that I just kind of built and then publish somewhere else. You know, it's kind of like the SVN export equivalent, right? You know, I don't really want to. You know, when you build, you don't actually build in your own bin debug, right? You don't take that and call that a deployment. You need to go and take it somewhere else. So in that example, that's a very basic publish off to file. Now this brings us to something that's really interesting, which is packaging. There's offline publishing, and there's online publishing, and there's offline packaging. So I'm going to right-click on Nerd Dinner, and I'm going to say Properties. You can also right-click, and I could say Package Publish Settings. And this is cool. There's two tabs here. There's Package and Publish Web. And all this is new and improved in 2010. And you can use it. It doesn't matter. It's not necessarily a 4.0 thing. It's an IDE thing. So you have these tools. So if you want to use them for other versions of .NET, that's cool. I can say, well, do I want all the files in the project or just the files needed to run this application? Only files needed to run this application means that if you have like an image that's not in the project, then it doesn't come along. Have you ever had that happen? Where you build something and you're like, what's going on? And like an image 6 folders down has an exclamation point on it because it got renamed or something. So you need to trust your projects and make your projects correct. Or just say, give me everything. I find using the project as a bill of lading, as a manifest, is a good idea. Then I can say, include databases. as well as doing things like, if I was running this site right now in IIS, I could say include all of the existing IIS settings. And this is cool because if I'm developing against IIS, and as a developer I get IIS set up the way I want, I can take those settings and then package them up. So I'm trying to walk you through a narrative here. There's the messing around with XML files. We have a solution for that. And then there's moving files from place to place. Yay. Right? And then now there's settings that are a little bit more sophisticated. Create deployment package as a zip file. And this is where I think things get interesting. And we'll talk about SQL in a little bit. So I'll just say build deployment package. And down in the build window, it's just going to say, yay. It's not really a particularly sophisticated thing. But if I go Tools Options, there's a little trick. I can go down into Projects and Solutions, into Build and Run. And there's a MS Build, Project Build, Output Verbosity, which I think is kind of ironic, considering they took a lot to say that, and I'm going to say a lot as well. So we're just going to say diagnostic, which is the equivalent of like a buttload, and say build deployment package. And then a bunch of stuff happens. And in that process, we see some of the web deploy stuff that's happening. Turns out that MS deploy and web deploy are kind of the same thing. The MS deploy is kind of technically the engine, and web deploy is the feature. But they are the same thing. So if I switch back and forth between MS deploy and web deploy, get that in your head. It's all the same. It's all the same thing. You see here it says a little link I can actually click on and view my package. It even does a little cool Explorer thing. So now I'm in Explorer inside of Visual Studio. In here, when I said build package, I got a nerddinner.zip. Okay, big deal, right? They zipped up my file. Innovation. Inside of that, though, are information and manifests, like what are the parameters that this package would potentially need to run. And then I can set those parameters from the outside. So inside the zip are all of the questions of what I might need. Well, where is this config file? And where is that setting? And what is that password? And what COM object? And all those kind of things. The questions are there. The answers can be provided by an answer file or by some alternative UI. And I'll talk about that in a second. So NerdDinner now is a flash frozen web application with a bunch of questions for doing stuff like open questions. What is the name of the application in IIS and things like that. And then we can open up set parameters, and those are some of, not all, but some of the defaults. Like here, it's going to put that in NerdDinner deploy. By default, that's going to be default website NerdDinner deploy. Okay. That package then. I'm going to take this folder and I'm going to just drop over into the green screen. I always wish there was a program a while back that Roy Osherov wrote called Keyboard Jedi, and it would sit in the corner and it would automatically show you what hotkeys that you did to do do a certain thing. So then people were like, "What did he just do?" I don't know, but somehow he did a blue, and then he pasted. So just because it's interesting, I'm holding down Shift and Control, and I'm clicking on the DOS deal. By hitting Shift and Control, I'm running whatever that thing I'm clicking on as administrator. So that's what that is, FYI. Then I know I have the path in my, yay, you're clapping for that too? Try holding down like Shift. That's cool too, right? Now there's a bunch of them. Now that's the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7th. Now I can go Windows 7. And just Alt-Tab between those things because it's the 7th one over. You like that? I can do Windows tricks all day. Dance, boy, dance. No? All right. That's another talk. Okay. Shift Control, click, and now I know that I have the path in my clipboard. CD space Alt space EP Enter. Right? So. This is what the unfit and infirm do to entertain themselves. Yes. I was on Channel 9 Live yesterday. I literally pulled my back, crossing my right leg over my left. Just before starting, like, I've hurt myself! I've hurt myself! I could tell. And, but I can do this, though. So when only these two tiny lobster claws work, I will be like, whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. So, so I got that going for me. What was generated by the packaging process was that zip file, the nerdinner deploy command, and then this README. I'm going to run that command file. And it actually conveniently pops up this notepad explaining what's going on. I can run nerdinner deploy /t for test. This is the what if switch. It's going to run MS deploy, and it's going to show me everything that it would do, but not actually do it. So here we've got add file path, add dir, dir path, adding site manifest, updating application in IIS. Oops, too far. Setting ACLs, making sure permissions are set. But it just tested it. It didn't actually do it. Okay? Let's put that over there. Let's go into IIS. Let's put him over here. I've got I made a couple of websites here. I made a 2.0, just to show you so there's no magic or anything. You've probably seen or heard about this already, that you can have, all these different things living side by side. So I may have got like a 2.0 app pool and a 2.0 classic app pool and a 4.0 classic. So all the different combinations all running on the same machine, all running on the same IIS. For the purposes of the demo, I've made two separate websites. I've made one 2.0 and one 4.0 because I wanted to show you that all these tools are working in both places. So I've got the 4.0 application running. It's actually already got an app underneath it running. I think it's the one we did at the keynote is sitting right there. So I'm going to say nerdinner deploy, and instead of /t for test, I'll say /yes for do it. And we'll run that. And it shows up in IIS, and it's an application, and all the settings are there, and all the ACLs are correct, and it's good. And they don't clap, but they'll clap for that, and that's okay. No, don't. I don't want your pity claps. I don't want. If I can't earn it, then that's totally cool. Build package brings it out to here. I can then go msdeploy.command. And all msdeploy command is going to do is it's going to take some of the things that were hard in the past and make them easier. Now here's where it starts getting interesting. I can do things like do this remotely. We'll talk about that in a second. I could say deploy over to there. Okay. I can pass in things like usernames and passwords. There's an update to MS Deploy that came out a couple weeks ago that will let you use the credentials stuff, so you don't have to pass in passwords on your command line. There's even a thing called temp agent, where if you have enough power on a remote machine, you can say use temp agent, and as administrator, you'll actually inject in a version of MS Deploy on that machine and then do the work. So for setting up large systems, for setting up web farms, this can be really cool. You can use it from the command line like this. You can use it from Visual Studio, like we did earlier. And you could put this into continuous integration. It integrates with Team System. It can, whatever you want to do. You can start kind of seeing how this would be easier. But that's not all. If I go into IIS over here, I can click on any application that already exists inside of IIS. Because oftentimes, you'll give a package to somebody or you'll deploy something, and your IT administrator will make some changes. And he'll say, well, now it works. It's perfect. Well, the IT guy inside of IIS can make packages too. They can click on Export Application. And this is this standard dialog, Export Application. And they can go in here and say, well, I want all of this, but I don't want that. They can even manage components. And there are dozens of cool components. These are all provider-based, and you can write them yourself. So here, he can go and set where it's going to show up in IIS. But I can extend this. So MS Deploy can do tasks like recycle apps, set registry keys, put things in the GAC, update COM objects, set permissions, do anything you want in SQL that we'll talk about in a minute. Update app pool settings, whatever you like. It's about getting it right. because I've said before, and I actually wasn't practicing it. What is it they say? Those who can't teach. But I was saying that if you find yourself going like this and deploying, then you're doing it wrong. I would even go so far as to say, if you do that more than once, stop, take the 10 minutes it'll take and set this up, and then move on with your life. And think about all the time that you'll make back. But, you just get it, shoot, I've got Smart FTP up right now, it would be so easy to just drag, right? But I can remember now that I can set settings for local deploy or FTP. I can go inside of here and select FTP, and it's handled for me. And it'll take care of all the diffs and do everything it needs to do to put that out there. All right, so packages. So the IT guy can make these packages, but this package format is useful in a number of different ways. I could go up to Microsoft.com/web. Is it Irish Day today? What is it? St. Patty's Day? Yeah, I'm going to keep it classy. I'm going with a green wine. Come on, Internet. So up in here, there is a gallery. The web gallery. And this is full of different apps that I can bring down. Some of them are .NET, some of them are PHP, there's Umbraco and .NET Nuke and all this kind of stuff. Okay? These all come down with this app, the Web Platform Installer. Web Platform Installer actually uses all of this stuff underneath. So I'm not going to demo that because you can go figure that out. Go to Microsoft.com/web, install this, and it's yummy and wonderful. I'm going to go to two things. I'll go to DOSBlog. DOSBlog is a little blog engine that we worked on a couple years ago. Looks like we haven't really done anything in a while, but it's not dead. It's done. This guy here, I wasted an hour of my life trying to get this application up and running. This is me, of course. And here's a guy who says, upgrade was a breeze, you're awesome. And here's a guy who says a plethora, depending on where you're from, of errors and permission problems. I went through each line in the config files and I verified every value. I mean, what does that make me feel like, right? It makes me feel bad. That's not okay. Well, DOSBlog, and I need to update the documentation, but DOSBlog has got some abilities now because we've packaged up that zip file in a certain way. We did this manually. I'll show you what we've got. This is the DOSBlog from a year ago, DOSBlog web files. And it's got, welcome to DOSBlog, feature request, and then it's got manifest and parameters. I'm going to pull those out, drag them on this tiger's head. I don't like you, Mr. Tiger. Go away. Ah! All right. Ah. All right, let's look at our manifest. So here's a manifest for our DOSBlog open source application that says, I'm going to need read, write, and delete. DOSBlog is interesting and unique because it has no database. And I thought this was going to be a problem. Like, how are you going to deal? We have needs. We need to have write access. And this is the thing. The standard thing we tell people with installing DOSBlog is upload it to your hoster, email them, and then wait for 72 hours while one of them finds out if it's okay to give you write access to a folder. Here we can go and give access to the XML files that manage DOSBlog. And we can also indicate the default path. So we're expressing our needs here in the DOSBlog. Then parameters is really interesting. It's just parameter. I made it small just to give you an idea that that's all there is. It's about 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 parameters. Okay? These are things that DOSBlog needs. And here's where I think it gets really cool. DOSBlog stores all of our parameters in XML files. We have config files. Some people store their parameters and they're kind of like stuff I need to know in a database, an INI file, or XML file. DOSBlog puts it in an XML file. So we can actually say not only what we need, the example of how the format we want it in, the default value if you don't give me one, and then we can also say where we're going to put it. So here we say we're going to stick it in this file, site config, and we're going to go and match on the method called root, and we're going to poke text in there. All in one nice clean line. Here, when you say, what's the title of your blog? It goes in this file, on that, and we shove the text in. So all of these parameters now can be used over here. So I've got nothing in this website. Okay, there's nothing underneath there. No magic here. And I can, prove it to you, but import application. I'll hit browse, and I'll just pick that zip file. So this is going to be offline. This is the scenario where, I'm a dev, you're an IT, I build this thing up, there's no network connection between us, and I get it to you somehow, and I say import application, and now you're doing that. We have no connection. So I've packaged it. And this is not a modified version of .blog. This has been like this for a year. I'm going to hit next. It looks a little bit different than that export one because now I've got those grant permissions. You see how they showed up there? So the IT person gets to see that standard dialog, whether they're exporting or importing. And they can see what's going to happen when they do this. So I'm going to say cool. And of course I can go and do advanced settings, and they can decide whether they want to allow certain things or not. They can even do what ifs from here. Here's where it gets interesting. The packaging import tool automatically generates a user interface for their package import based on the parameters. So I can fill that out now. Come in and put in a password. It knows that that's a password, and it gives me a little password text there, Okay? Told me what it did. Does that look familiar? Where'd that come from? MS Deploy engine. Hit finish. Will he stick the landing this time? Boom. So that's cool. If you have an existing application, if you have an open source application, you need to hook this up. If you have an app at work that has a Word document, it's all read me first, all caps, with a screenshot of some aspect of IIS in it and a checkbox with a big red circle around it. Make sure that check, or nothing will work. You're living this, right? I wanted to do this talk at MIX because we don't get the message out about this kind of stuff, because it's complicated to express the fullness of this, right? The keynote demos, they can go and say import boom, and what happened? I don't know. I watched it frame by frame in Silverlight, and I still don't really quite know what happened. So there's a Visual Studio UI for packaging. You can also open these files up yourself, and you can edit them. I wrote the .blog one just in a text editor by looking at the spec. There's config transformation. So you've got that plugging into your build system. You've got your publish system. So there's debug and release are configuration options. And then publishing might also be named debug and release. But you might publish a debug build to release. So it's two separate drop-downs. So I want to show that real quick. See this here? We named in the keynote, I said I had staging and staging, just for simplicity's sake. But publish, the name of that publish might be, the name of one of the 7 dwarves or whatever you decide to call your internal system, so that people understand that they're building this and they're deploying that. Okay? The packaging can be done with build deployment package. You can spit these things out using and install them either in IIS by going import application, and you get that nice UI. You can do it from the command line using MS Deploy, or just using the .command file that gets automatically generated. But there are things that MS Deploy can do that are bigger than that are more than just that little bit of magic that we did. Let me go and grab this here. Service dump.bat. Go back out here, Alt space EP. MS-deploy is all provider-based. So if you search around on the web, you'll find people like on Stack Overflow and places saying that this is, it's a really baroque syntax. It's really confusing. And it's because it's provider-based and it uses these strings to refer to like verb dump. They were like, well, why doesn't it say just hyphen dump? Because it doesn't know about dump, right? It knows about this generic verb that could be Scott or Fred or Joe. And you could add your own. And then source and destination have this kind of interesting syntax. Here I'm saying MS-deploy, go and dump the meta key, the meta information inside of the IIS metabase on that computer localhost. So kind of remotely, I can get a sense of what's going on here. I can look at the keys in the metabase. I can see the different folders that are set up. And I can interrogate remote servers. Now, one of the things that I often find myself doing in any system that has got more than one web server is keeping things in sync, keeping chunks of content in sync. So I can do this. Now I'm doing this on localhost, but I want to make it really, really clear that this has nothing to do with localhost. Okay? MS-deploy verb sync source C:, source data, comma. I said comma because after that localhost is implied. Comma, computer name is what you would put there. Then we say destination content path C destination data. This is C on the remote machine. Pretend that localhost is a remote name. Right? I could have used a host file to fool you guys, but I would never try to fool you. So then I'm going to go and say source data. Destination data. So that's a remote content push, not UNC paths. And this is important. Because the other thing when you start getting more and more and more sophisticated in large systems is you find yourself encoding UNC paths into your batch files, whether it be a batch file or a rake file or it's a PS1, a PowerShell file. At some point, someone gets the knowledge of a share, and then you have to figure out what users have access to that share, and It becomes really complicated. There's a service called the Web Deployment Agent Service. You can control when it starts up and the access that it has and what port that it runs on. And there's a couple of different kind of layers to these services. There is the layer of, he actually wrote this down because I want to make sure I got this right. There's the when you're admin, right? Like I'm going to be deploying to a box under my desk, and I have complete power of that. And then there's the more third-party hoster thing where I want to feel like I have admin, but I really only have it on this one particular thing. So you can control these things. There's the Web Deployment Agent Service, and then there's this thing WMSVC that is more of an IIS service that's a management service for more sophisticated operations. In this case here, I can have that service on each of my machines in the farm, fire them up, sync content, bring them down. You can also use this temp agent concept where there's a machine that I have admin on, but I don't have this on, and I'm going to temporarily kind of just fire up an agent and bring something over there. And it makes managing synchronization between systems really easy. And then also that you can see that you can MS deploy and say /m computer name. I could go and say, here's a package, and call MS deploy, MS deploy, MS deploy. So then deploy.bat looks like that. So then imagine how you could build a continuous integration system. And if you search around on the web for MS deploy and continuous integration, you'll see people who have integrated it very nicely, such that when their build completes, they can deploy out to a single machine, or they can deploy out to a farm. At my last job, when I was working at Carillion that is now check-free, we actually stopped making the build artifact just a file of a directory of files, and we turned it into a virtual machine. So the thing that the build would produce was a VM. You'd fire up a VM with automation. You'd deploy into the VM and then hibernate and then give it to the sales guy. So then each day they could go and pick up a fresh, here's the running demo of the app in a VM. And having something like MS Deploy being able to do that, set all of the settings, create all the things, and then you can extend it. If there are providers that you want to create to make it do something that we haven't thought of. You can do that. I went and wanted to do it kind of in a live hoster example. So what I did is I went to, I think it's, this is OrcsWeb specific. I went to vs2010host.com, and this is this program at OrcsWeb. And I didn't tell them I was doing this, to be clear. I didn't call them and like, get ready. So if it doesn't work, that's why. And you fill out this form, and this is a test for .NET 4 RC. And they link to some blogs. You sign up, and then they sent me an email. Here's the email. And this email has, welcome, blah, blah, blah. Here's the information you'll need for the Visual Studio Beta. The information you need to enter into the Visual Studio Publish Wizard is. So I just emailed them. I said, I want a website. This is the keynote demo, the one that we showed. So I right-click and I hit Publish Settings. Go. All right. Select Web Deploy. Here's the service URL. This 8072, see this little button right here? To publish locally, put localhost. To publish remotely, say this. And to publish remotely through Windows Management Service. Right, so they've done something, they pushed some button that magically spun up a cool, I don't know, something, a VM out there. It's kind of like halfway to the cloud kind of thing. It's not cloud, but it's just hosting, right? I mean, think about what a hassle it is. They email you FTP details, and then you go back and forth, or you use their cheesy HTML tool to change permissions on files. Here, they said, give me OrcsWeb, it's 8172 MS Deploy. They said, Microsoft2.orcsweb, application on destination, leave files on destination, do not delete. You must check untrusted certificate because they haven't put up a SSL for that, and publish. I remember I put it on diagnostic, super magic diagnostic mode. While that's happening, I'm going to come over here, because one of the other things that they did is under Package and Publish SQL. Now, you remember that little bit of config I had to do to say I'm going from SQL Express to something else? So here we've got the data source they told me to use. Username equals, right? They had me put that in there. I didn't log into SQL Management Studio and make a database. I just did this. I said I want to take store entities deployment, and you can even click import from web config, and it'll suck those over and put them into this thing. And then I said, I want to pull from SQL Express. But because for my keynote demo, it is the data is in my debug, I want to take that too. So they actually auto-generate SQL files and then run them remotely. But I can also go, if I want to, and say add script, and have custom SQL if I want to. And then one advanced technique, and this is like advanced, like they don't want us to do this, but it's cool anyway. I'm going to hit unload project. So I've removed the project. I've unloaded it. I haven't removed it. I've unloaded it. And then I'm going to right-click and say edit. So now I'm in the project file. You may have opened these occasionally. Here's some published database settings information. I'm going to change that. And I added this. Script drops first. Because in this case, I'm actually saying, and I think the reason that they did this is that if they made it a checkbox, it would be a checkbox that would destroy your database before deployment. So it's not a checkbox. It's a, thing like this. So I want it to blow away the database every single time. So I changed that. Then I pop out of here, go back and say reload project. Okay? Let's see if it worked. They gave me an IP address to hit. I don't actually have a domain yet. All right, rock on. Yep, boom. Didn't mess around with the database, didn't set any permissions. I filled out a form, and a dude emailed me, and I have a website at a hoster. That's pretty cool. You can actually go up at ASP.NET and click on Find a Hoster. Some people think it should be Find a Host. Don't know. I think Find a Hoster is fine. Find a Host Reno. There's a bunch of details up here. This is going to change. There'll be different hosters going through. You can do shared offers and virtual offers, dedicated offers. And all of these hosters are trying to support this MS Deploy program. OrcsWeb, again, they host my blog, VS 2010 hosts. You can go up and do the same kind of thing. The only thing that they're saying in this particular test, of course, is that, you know, this is not for production hosting. It's a test bed, and they're using it to give feedback to us. But I can say that I signed up for it in the hotel. They sent me an email. It's a user-generated email. They didn't know I was doing this. I didn't tell them ahead of time. And it's literally like, here are the URLs in blue. You can view your site here, and then IP address. And I didn't think it was going to work. I didn't think it could work because I just didn't feel like it could. Like, it's been so hard for so long and been so frustrating for so long. And like I've set up so many websites for so long, and it's just been, no, dude, basic authentication. Seriously, I mean, get it right. Check that box, not that. You know, it's not. And it just worked, and I'm happy about it. Once you have these things set up, then one-click publish, and that's where we want to get. One-click publish. One-click publish is effectively, you know, build.bat, deploy.bat. So that's what I've got. That's my talk. I hope that you check it out. Vishal Joshi helped me with this, and his blog is a host of great articles on MS Deploy. You can go around and search for MS Deploy. Go to iis.net. You probably already have this on your machine. Go to iis.net, check it out. You can go to microsoft.com/web and look in the web gallery, and you can test this. You can package up PHP apps like this. You can package up ASP.NET apps like this. You can make them yourself. You can make them with the tools. IT guys can make them. Command line, in IIS, in Visual Studio. It's all the same great engine. It's all web deploy underneath. And if you have any questions, we can take a couple questions, or I'll hang out up front. Thank you very much.